get started then. Welcome everybody. I'm Tom Kane, and this is the Partners in Education Research public seminar series. Just a couple of logistical reminders. The session is being recorded, so please keep that in mind when you ask questions. Not that any of you would ask any questions that wouldn't be appropriate, but just a useful reminder. Also, during Constance's talk, I would just ask that people hold their questions to clarifying questions. And if there are bigger think questions, like, to hold those till the end. I know that's different from our usual rules of operation when we're in person, but in this virtual format, I think that works best. So clarifying questions during the talk, open discussion when Constance is finished. Now I just wanted to extend a warm welcome to Constance Lindsay, who's joining us today. Constance is an assistant professor at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill School of Education, where she's been for a year. Before that, she was at the Urban Institute. So Constance and her co-authors have a paper from a couple years ago on the long-term effects of having, for African-American students, having an African-American teacher. And there were huge, like mind-bogglingly large effects of being randomly assigned an African-American teacher in early grades. So grades K through 3. The long-term impacts are 5 percentage points on high school graduation rates and 4 percentage points on likelihood of going to college. And that's with random assignment. So thinking about, like, what are the mechanisms by which those effects, we get such large effects just from having been randomly assigned a teacher in kindergarten through 3rd grade. Is just fascinating. So if you've not read the paper yet, I encourage everybody to read that one. The paper that Constance is presenting today is a follow-on to that, looking at the effects of principal and teacher matching on teacher turnover. So welcome, Constance. We're thrilled to have you tonight.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for the invitation. I'm excited, and I also see my old RA, Miss Victoria Lee, there. Good to see you. Okay, so let me share my screen. Okay, so this is preliminary / joint work that I have with Anna Galatay, who is my co-author. She's over at NC State. And this is also work that was funded by the Spencer Foundation. And so what we're going to look at here is the relationship between principal-teacher demographic match and teacher turnover using the North Carolina administrative data. Hold on, I'm just gonna screen up a little bit. Okay. So the motivation for this paper, as is for everything that I kind of do, is just this sort of empirical fact that the public school student body is now and in the future going to be majority students of color. And we still have these persistent achievement gaps and gaps on achievement-related outcomes that have been very difficult to close. we find ourselves sort of with this challenge. And one of the things that my work has sort of spoken to is that us thinking about the role that teachers play um, with regard to race and some of these interactions might be a particular lever we can use to close some of these gaps. And so we have this sort of growing awareness of the influential role that teachers of color play with students of color. And eventually I'm going to switch my language to Black teachers, and I'll tell you why that is in a second. But there's lots of interest now, not only on sort of the recruitment piece, but also on the retention of teachers of color. And if you think about it, this is a sort of keeping people in the classroom, could be a low-cost strategy to maximize the impact of the existing pool, while we sort of work simultaneously to both get more people in the room or get more people in the classroom, and then also think about long-run strategies for just diversifying the workforce as a whole. We also need to think critically about the correlates of teacher attrition. And here I should say that this is pre-COVID data, and we'll have to do some level setting after. Well, I don't know if there is an after COVID, but in the coming years, we'll have to think about level setting and what the workforce looks like. So this work, I'm really focusing on principles. And we know from many years of the literature that principals are one of the main drivers of school culture, and in turn, teacher turnover. With my colleagues, Jason Grissom and Anna, we actually have been working on a synthesis of the past 20 years of principal research. And one of the things that we sort of conclude is that principals are one of the key things, right? They're a key element of what happens in schools, which is not shocking, obviously. And so we now have sort of a cottage industry of literature sort of showing that there are benefits to students from access to having demographically matched teachers. So there's research that shows that there's achievement impacts. There's also impacts on things like on different socio-emotional sort of outcomes. So things like expectations. My colleague Cassie Hart and I have a paper that looks at disciplinary outcomes, also using North Carolina data. Tom gave you guys an overview of our long run paper. And then with Seth Gershenson and Mike Hansen from Brookings, we have a book coming out in January where we're really just making the case that teacher diversity is teacher quality, right? And so the way I like to think about these things is that, the teaching profession has lots of challenges, and sort of thinking about creating this high quality, diverse workforce, we should just be thinking about teacher diversity as a piece of it, right? Not sort of at odds with it. And so that's kind of where we have evolved to after working on these issues for a while. So, but today I'm going to focus mainly on teacher turnover. And this has been a challenge for public schools. We know that research has clearly demonstrated, and common sense kind of tells us, that teacher turnover has negative impacts on student achievement. And we also see that in schools that serve high needs and also schools that are otherwise hard to staff, they are particularly vulnerable to high rates of teacher turnover. And so thinking about who tends to staff these types of schools, this question of sort of teacher turnover as it relates to teachers of color is a really important one to investigate. So I did some data crunching from the most recent national teacher follow-up survey, which suggests that teachers of color leave the profession at a higher rate than white teachers. And then they also change schools at a higher rate. So they're churning more, I guess is how you can think about it. And then also the teacher follow-up survey has some self-reported questions. And so among the teachers who change schools, teachers of color are more likely to report their moves as involuntary, right? And they also identify school factors as the primary reason for leaving the profession and changing schools or changing schools. And so let me give you some sort of background on what the principal workforce looks like. Surprise, surprise, it looks just like the teacher workforce. It is largely white. And I think what's kind of striking, it's gotten a little more diverse over time. So this is data taken from the administrations of the SAS, and then most recently the National Principal and Teacher Survey. And so we've seen, some growth, but nowhere near sort of what you might think in terms of representation, particularly with regard to the public school student body. But the principals do represent sort of who's out there in terms of the teacher workforce as it exists now. It looks a little bit different though for principal gender, and I thought this is actually, anytime the graphs cross, I think that's exciting for people like us. And so women, there was a time when women weren't really principals, and so then now we kind of see that they've sort of surpassed the men. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to sort of look at the race match and then gender match, okay? And so the research questions are relatively straightforward. I'm just going to be looking at the impact of teacher turnover for teachers when they are demographically matched to their principal. And I'll mostly focus on race, but we also have matching for gender as well. And then I'm just going to explore whether these relationships are the same for novice teachers. And I would be really interested when we start our sort of comments, if you guys could give me sort of ideas of other things that you'd like to see, because we have some opportunities with these data. So now that we sort of have all of this work that looks at sort of teacher-student race match, researchers are now trying to look at sort of the principal-teacher match. And a lot of this work actually is researchers using the SAS and MPTS to look at sort of Black teachers' reports of things like teacher trust and job satisfaction. And so there's a few articles that show that Black teachers have lower levels of job satisfaction when they're matched to a Black principal. There's some interesting variation by region, right? And so that's something we should also keep in the back of our minds, is that this is going to look different in different places, right? And then, so a few of these papers sort of use the SAS to show that the Black teachers or teachers of color tend to trust their principal more when they share the same race. And we know that trust is an essential element of school culture. Okay. There's also some researchers that have started to look at the implications of principal race for labor market behaviors. So there is work that shows that teachers are more likely to apply to a position when they have the same race as the principal, and they're less likely to seek a new position when their current principal is their same race. And then there's a Grissom and Bartanen paper. I think it's a Ed working paper. I don't know if it's I'm not sure if it's been published yet, but I know it's available through that Annenberg working paper series, where they do basically something similar to what we're doing. They're matching, and they're also making use of surveys, and they have data from Tennessee and Missouri. Okay, so our analyses are similar. We're just going to be using North Carolina data. So the data come from the North Carolina, I probably have this acronym wrong, Data Education Research Center, which is housed at Duke. So even though I work at UNC, I went to Duke for undergrad. So I always have to say that, because I don't want anybody to be like, go Heels, because I'm not gonna do go whatever back to you. Okay. And so basically what I have here is we have basically personnel and pay information for teachers, principals, and assistant principals from 1995 to 2018. And there's a few restrictions. So they basically give us a file that has demographic information for everybody, all the people that have ever worked for the system. And so we're limited to those teachers and principals for whom we have that information, right? Because the whole point is about matching. And then we also just made some business rule decisions about how to sort of capture the state of the workforce in a given year. And so what we did was we said, we're going to basically take a snapshot of the third pay period of the year, because we figured people would be settled by then. So that's in September. And then those folks who are listed as having more than 0.90 FTE. And so you can tell me you don't like that when we move to the comments. There's other choices that we could have made there too. Okay, so basically what we're trying to do here is look to see whether there is a match, and then maybe think about why this match exists, right? We know that these interpersonal relationships are very important. And we know that race for sure plays a role in those relationships. And so we're just trying to understand that. Okay, so just to give you a sense of some of the demographics in North Carolina, it looks like national data. So the teaching workforce is largely white. The student body is getting less white over time. The number of Black students actually remain relatively flat. There is a growing Latinx population in North Carolina. And so here I'll say, I'm probably going to switch to talking about Black teachers, because what happens is Black teachers and Black principals mainly, even though there's some models where everybody's there, because in many years, there are 0 Hispanic principals in the early years. Even in more recent years, the numbers are just really low. And so it's hard to do some of this matching that we might like to do. I think this is actually a tremendous opportunity for a grad student who's interested in Latinx education to find a place that has enough people to do some matching and test whether some of these relationships might hold. So when generally I'm talking about teachers of color, I'm really talking about Black teachers, because there's a critical mass that we can actually do some of the matching with. So the intention was there, but the numbers sort of prevent me from exploring some of that. And so, so here's my graph that kind of shows that, right? So here's the principal demographics in North Carolina over time. And this is just taken straight from the pay files, right? And so I'll say a couple things. So one, it looks like national data. 2, the Black and white percentages stay basically flat over time. The Black percentage hovers around like 23. I think at most it's like 26. And then it just goes back and forth sort of between those two. There's small growth in Hispanic principals in the later years, but just not a ton. And literally it's 0. And then I'll also mention that North Carolina has a small but representative Native American populations, about 1% of the students. And then there's also a UNC system campus that's wholly dedicated to, that I guess would probably count as a, I don't want to get the acronym wrong, but a Native serving institution. But again, so there's not enough of those folks to kind of do some of the matching that we do with the Black and white matches, unfortunately. But I think would be super interesting. And so the gender sort of representation also has the same pattern as the national data. So remember the other graph went back to 1988. This graph starts in 1995. So it's about the same thing. About in 2000, you have this sort of switch where there are now more women principals than men principals. Okay. So the measures are actually relatively simple. So I'm actually going to talk about teacher turnover and promotion. And right now I have this very sort of rudimentary measure of turnover, which is just if you've changed the school over the course of this time period, you're recorded as having experienced turnover. And then sort of, you can think about promotion as kind of like well, it's not necessarily a subset, but promotion basically captures whether you become an assistant principal or principal over this time period, right? And so the expected hypothesis, so we know that teacher turnover is greater for Black teachers. But we also, I think there's mixed evidence about what the impact might be on promotion. And then the main independent variables are this teacher principal demographic match variable. So just to give you some, yeah.
Sorry, Constance, one quick question. So like, would a teacher exiting the profession even if they don't show up in another school, would that be considered turnover too?
That would get captured in this turnover variable the way I have it now.
Okay.
I would love to hear suggestions on this. I don't have reliable way to characterize system exit. I can just tell when people drop out, but I don't know if it's a retirement or what the case may be. But if they stayed, yeah, I can just see when they change job codes, basically, or job locations. Yeah, but that's a good question. Okay. So just to give you some descriptive statistics, about 23% of the sample turns over. 26% of the sample gets either promotion to AP or principal. About 15% of the sample is Black, which is, jives with sort of the numbers I showed you. 20% are men, and the bulk of the sample obviously is teachers. And so there's about over from 95 to 2003, there's about 2.6 million sort of observations and about 187,000 people, so unique people in the system. In North Carolina, the number of teachers usually over time usually hovers between 100,000 and 125,000, and so it's usually somewhere in that range. Okay, so just to give you some sort of some descriptive statistics by some of the categories that I'm thinking about. So these are just comparisons for turnover for the Black and white teachers and then for promotion. And so what you see is that Black teachers are more likely to turn over than white teachers. So these were just simple t-tests, and they're all statistically significantly different from each other. Though I did not include that here because it's 2 million observations, so whatever. Black teachers are also more likely to be promoted, which I thought was interesting. And I think there's lots of really nice ethnographic evidence out there about how that might not necessarily be a good thing. So we can talk about what to make of some of these results. In terms of, you see similar patterns for men and women, actually. So men are more likely to turn over, but they're also more likely to be promoted. And then finally, I look at sort of turnover for novice teachers as compared to, I could not think of a better word, so I just used seasoned, as compared to seasoned teachers. So novice teachers are 45% turnover rate, and the seasoned teachers are more sort of close to the average for everyone. Okay. Okay, so if we were sort of thinking about this from a sort of naive perspective, we would just compare teachers who are matched to those who are not, right? And so we know that's not going to work for what we're trying to do because there's all sorts of selection that determines who sorts into what school and why. And so we want to try to sort of, I guess I'm using the word effect, but what we're trying to do is get close to an effect, I guess I should say. And so basically what we're going to do is we're going to include district, school, and year fixed effects. And we're going to control for time invariant characteristics of schools and districts that are associated with teacher turnover and promotion. So trying to account for that school and district culture piece. And then I have some time varying stuff that I'm including, which is teacher education and experience, which is available for most years. And then we also have some school controls. We have student growth at the school level, which I'm actually not going to present today. And then I'll talk to you guys a little bit about it's the working condition survey. I'll tell you about that sort of more towards the end. Okay, so just to give you a preview of the findings, the race match is consistently associated with lower turnover and higher rates of promotion, although there's some interesting results with when I throw the Black in with the race match variable for the promotion. This is driven by Black teacher match, obviously. And then there's some evidence of sex match effects, and there's an interaction there by race that I will also show you. I have a set of tables that I did not include for today, and I'll tell you why towards the end. But basically, we also tried to put a leadership scale into the model, and there wasn't much there. So the leadership scale comes from that working condition survey. Okay. So just to give you the results, so the preferred model, okay, so what you're looking at in the next series of tables is basically the OLS, just plain regular OLS with no controls. Then you're looking at the OLS with the teacher controls, and then the third column is race match with the fixed effects. And then the fourth column is where you should sort of draw your attention to, which is why I bolded it. That's going to be the teacher controls as well as the district, school, and year fixed effects. Okay. And so it's not a large effect, but it's you're going to see it's kind of a consistently present effect, or relationship, I should say, because I know somebody's going to be like, this is not causal. Okay. So here I'm throwing the Black coefficient into the model. And so you can think about this as Black teachers are more likely to turn over, but then when they are race matched, some of that is mitigated, right? So that gap doesn't go away, but it just gets smaller. And so you should think about, so let me go back to the first table. Here in this first table, what's going to be driving this here is that most of the white teachers in the sample are race matched, right? And so I was really curious to see what was really going on for the Black teachers. And so that's why I threw this in here like this. Okay, so then we look at promotion. And so, okay. And so basically we find that Black teachers are more likely to be promoted. So we know that, right? Because I showed you those t-tests. And then there's a sort of an additional bump from being race matched to their principal. For novice teachers, they are less likely to turn over when they are race matched as well. Okay, and so then I just look at novice Black teachers and find that they are also less likely to, they're more likely to turn over, but less likely to turn over when they are matched to a same race principal. Okay. So does everybody get what they're looking at, I think? Okay, so then I actually looked at gender match effects. And so what I'm doing here is I'm actually putting everything sort of into one table. So for each of these models, you have the teacher controls, you have the fixed effects. And so then you have a match on gender, sort of with, this is just everybody without that Black coefficient in there. And if you're gender matched, which is mainly going to be, so that's mainly going to be driven by white women, you're going to be less likely to turn over. There's this interesting thing here. If you are Black and you're matched to, which is mainly going to be driven by Black women, because there's basically 2% of the sample is Black men, or men of color, which I guess, yeah. So you're more likely to turn over, but then less likely so when you're matched to a same race, or sorry, same gender principal. Okay. And then matching on gender has a positive effect for novice teachers. I don't know what that means. Okay. And same thing, there's this weird thing about being gender matched and you're less likely to get a promotion. So I'm not quite sure what's going on here. They're also very tiny effects, right? So, I should have said this in the beginning. So these are just LPM models. So you can interpret those coefficients as percents. So you can look at the constant and sort of think about what the percent change is there. So sorry about that, I should have said that. I think the only thing sort of interesting here is I guess there's a couple interesting things here, but for the Black teachers, they're more likely to be promoted, but then when they are matched to a same gender person, they're less likely to be promoted. I don't know I don't know what sort of theory would explain that. Okay, I'm less excited about the sort of gender match stuff. Okay. All right. So then what we try to do is we try to North Carolina administers a working conditions survey every couple of years. And so I have played around with this working conditions survey for multiple years. And what we try to do is we try to say, does race matched predict what will be your school average responses to this survey? And basically we don't find much of anything. Let me talk about what's in the working condition survey to start. So for example, there's several scales. And so the leadership scale, which we were particularly excited about, has things like, there's an atmosphere of trust. There is, support from the leadership. The teachers are held to high professional standards. So things like that. We put these in a series of scales. We factor analyze them. And so
I'm not sure I understand.
I guess my Siri is talking to me. Wait a minute. Okay. Sorry. Take that off. And so basically we put these, so we did a couple of things. So we put them,
I think that qualifies as a clarifying question.
Well, Siri? Yeah.
Yeah, Siri.
Yeah. I don't understand. Yeah. Okay. So, right. Okay. So I created a series of scales. And so basically what we do is we try to see whether match predicts responses to those scales, and we don't find much of anything. Nothing is significant. There's also, I should say here, there's also, I'll just be candid about, there's like missing data issues because I can only link at the school level because these are self-reported surveys that can't be linked back to individual teachers. So this is me trying to like do my best with what I have here. Okay. Oh, it's going by fast. Okay. So I'll say this, I didn't present the table, but we also do the models for all of the teacher turnover with the leadership scale included, and there was nothing there. And so I'd be curious in the conversation to sort of think about, how we might use this working condition survey better. Okay, so just to go over the findings, we find this positive effect of having a same race principal on teacher turnover for the full sample. We have these linear probability models with teacher controls, as well as these school and district and year fixed effects. Being race matched to your principal leads to lower teacher turnover. The controls move in the expected directions. We also find effects of having the same gender principal, but I'm sort of unclear what to make of those, just because of sort of the dynamics of the workforce and sort of what I think are strange directions of the coefficients. So there is some evidence of a gender match. I don't know what to make of it. We also find that for the subsample of Black teachers, having a Black principal ameliorates turnover for Black teachers, sort of over above the controls and the fixed effects. And we see some interactive effects for being Black and gender. And with that, I will open it up for questions and comments.
Great. Thanks, Constance. So if folks have questions, I think if you raise your hand, and then I will try to keep track of the order in which folks are raising hands. I would point out that at least Jenny Lovison is on this call, is a North Carolina State grad, and Peter Blair is a Duke grad. And Kaylin, I'm not sure if did you go to Chapel Hill?
No, sir. I went to Appalachian State University.
Oh, okay.
Oh, great.
Right.
That's awesome.
Okay. So, Peter.
Yeah, Constance, thank you so much for being here with us and for a really fascinating presentation. I teach some of your papers in my class. My question, I had two questions. One is, can you tell us how principals are chosen in the state, and does that vary from district to district? And the second question has to do with, do you have any measures in your survey of like the interactions between principals and the teachers, either during the hiring process or during the evaluation process ex post? Because I'm wondering if you could use that as a leverage point to say in places where the principals are directly involved in hiring and or like other types of promotion decisions more intensively, like if you see like an amplification of your effects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are both good questions. So to the first question, so basically, so as I understand it, what happens in North Carolina is that you have to get your principal certification or your licensure credentialing And then you have the ability to sort of apply to whatever jobs are open. So, but beyond that, I don't know anything about, I don't think there's been any work done on hiring of principals and race, although I shouldn't say that because I don't know, or I'm not aware, I should say, in particular in North Carolina, but it is a very limited pool every year. So, so like the total number of principals hovers around like 2,500 in a given year. And when I was like sort of going through making the charts, it would only inch up by like 10 or, you know, very small amounts each year, which makes sense, right? Because, you know, principals, lot less principals. But yeah, for sure, could think more about the mechanisms through which people end up at their particular school. Yeah, good point. To the second point, in these data, so the question was about interactions prior to hiring. Okay, so I can't see applications. All I can see right now, and maybe I can find it, but all I can see right now is pretty much when you are post-hired, everything that happens to you after that, as long as you're receiving a paycheck from North Carolina. So I don't have where you might have applied to, and I don't have the job openings that would have been available to you in that year, which I guess would be nice. And then sort of ex post, I don't know that I can tap into the evaluation data, but that's something that I could look into. I don't know that it could be available, but I'm not sure that I requested it for this project, but I can look and see. Yeah, that's a good question.
Thank you.
Mary.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Constance. This was super, super interesting. I had one clarifying question I maybe should have asked during, and then one more substantive question. For the clarifying question, I think I might have misunderstood this, but did you present, I think you presented a table with promotion as the outcome. And did you find that novices could be promoted to assistant principal?
No, I didn't do those models for novices.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because so novice I defined as 3 years or below. So I just presume that, yeah, I didn't run those models for novices.
Okay. Yeah, I must have misunderstood something.
Yeah, I figured if somebody that early in their career gets promoted, that's a special enough situation that, you know, so, but I could, yeah, but no, I didn't show a table for that.
That makes perfect sense. I must have just misheard something. My other question was just maybe going off of Peter's question, just like thinking about what, as like a next step, what we can think about the mechanisms for this might be. And if you had more knowledge of just like what principals can control about the teacher experience, like I assume they can't set pay rates or anything, but like assigning certain students to certain teachers, or what you think the mechanisms behind some of this might be.
Yeah, so the original hypothesis was that once we looked at the working conditions, that I actually thought the results would go away. So you know, we're accounting for things about schools that are pretty stable over time. And so it would have to be, so if we think that these results are believable, it would have to be something sort of over and above characteristics of schools that are relatively stable. So it could be interpersonal relations. You might also wonder, and I guess that's something I can investigate. You might also wonder sort of what are the who are the Black teachers that are in situations with white teachers, and what the distribution is. That's something I can think about. But I think it would have to rest on something interpersonal. I'm not convinced it's something about the schools necessarily. Yeah, that's a good question.
So next is Matt Leonard, currently residing in Wilmington, North Carolina, but formerly at Wake County Public Schools.
Thank you, Constance, this was great, super informative and really interesting given my past work in Wake.
Mhm.
I think I have two questions, both of which sort of relate to Mary's comments. One is thinking about mechanisms. I wonder if you could bring in classroom composition and think about the types of students that principals are exposed to.
Mhm.
You have in the district, I didn't have access to free lunch data, but through ERDC you do, and so you could
Yeah.
proxy for poverty at the classroom level.
Mhm.
Could be revealing. I was also thinking about turnover as a really kind of a distal outcome. Have you thought about looking at maybe absenteeism data and thinking about a teacher's propensity just to, like, you know, play hooky if they just don't want to see their a teacher's propensity to play hooky if they don't want to see their principal on any given day?
Yeah, so I think Seth has already written that, but I have access to that. So yeah, that's, you might as well just throw it in there since I have it. Yeah. And to the student question, I don't have these connected to the student level data right now, but that's definitely something I could do.
Ben.
Yeah, hi. I've actually, one of my research papers focuses on different, for my dissertation focuses on different scaling approaches to maximize information from working conditions surveys. I'd like to ask you more
Great.
about the North Carolina survey,
Yeah.
you know, and the items that it included. Were there any items that focus specifically on leadership? And second, did you use the mean score on the raw scale, or did you construct, you know, like a binary scale where you were sort of looking at percent of favorable responses?
No. Okay, that's good, Ben, and I want to talk to you after this. So I can show you what the leaderships. I think I had the leadership scale up. What the items look like. So basically, all I did was I did used alpha and stata,
Mhm.
and just do like a scale that way.
Yeah.
I'm not a psychometrician, but I would be I'm really curious to hear about your work on the working conditions survey. I think it can be a very valuable tool. I just need to figure out the best way to use it.
Yeah, I'm happy to connect more like offline to
Mhm.
chat about that.
Okay, awesome. Yeah,
I'll send you my email.
that's good.
So Constance, I was just going back to your paper on the long-term impacts. Like, there were, just as I said, just when you think about it, just huge effects of having a same race teacher in early grades on college going and high school graduation. So like in terms of college going, like a 4 percentage point impact, that's about the same impact as like a, you know, a couple $1,000 change in, you know, the price of a college when you're a high school senior. So just in terms of just magnitude effect, it's big, which just has me wondering, okay, are there ways in which we might be able to get at least parts of that effect by deploying teachers, you know, differently? Like you and I were talking this afternoon about how even if you just assign teachers by semester to, you know, elementary classrooms, you could double the proportion of African American students who have an African American teacher without changing, you know, the percentage of teachers who are African American.
Mm-hmm.
So are there experiments like that like, or policies like that you'd be interested in testing? And like, you know, what are some of the ways in which maybe we could try to get more of the role model effect just by changing the way teachers are deployed rather than waiting for the changes in the pipeline to dramatically change the proportion of teachers that are African American.
Yeah. So, so as we were chatting about earlier, one of the things that we see in the North Carolina data, both discipline paper and the long-term paper, is that over 50% of the Black kids in North Carolina never have a Black teacher. And so we would want to think very strategically about how to deploy the existing workforce. And in particular, I think focusing on making sure that persistently disadvantaged Black kids have the opportunity to experience a Black teacher. So yeah, if somebody wants to run an experiment with me, we can do that. Although I said that this is going to be my last match paper, but maybe not. I also had a thought about perhaps we can, I thought maybe like people could randomize their Zoom assignments at the beginning of this year, but I thought that would be in poor taste. So I think there's definitely some opportunities there for sure. Yeah.
So Melanie, oh, by the way, I should say, we have some SDP districts that are folks who are participating on this call. If there's any district out there that's listening in on this call that would be interested in working with Constance to test the effects of different kinds of teacher assignment policies, I'm sure she'd be interested in talking to you. So next, Melanie.
Hi, Constance.
Hi, Melanie.
Thanks for this. Really interesting. I'm sorry if I missed this earlier in the talk because my memory spans like 30 seconds now. But I'm curious if you looked at the demographics of other teachers at these schools, both as like a correlate of the principal race, but also as a mechanism where if the principal is like drawing other teachers of color into the school, it might just make it a more supportive environment for novice teachers of color as well.
Yeah, so so that's on my to-do list, is to think about sort of the share of Black teachers. But no, I have not looked at it yet, but I can. Yeah, that's definitely is feasible. I could do that. Great.
Chris.
Constance, thank you for sharing your work with us. My question, and this may be more about the book that's you're writing.
Yeah.
But for me, like the teacher diversity issue is kind of like a partial equilibrium issue. It solves sort of like role model issues within schools, but there's also this like broader issue around like teacher pay or like diminishing the wealth gap between like Black people and like white people. So like teacher diversity sit within the policy context of like a low wage occupation to like having like Black people choose like higher wage occupations.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's great. It's a great point. So I think at the end of the long run paper, we do some back of the envelope calculations about, or really from a more sort of like philosophical standpoint, thinking about asking the few Black BA holders that we have to take a pay cut and go be teachers. There's some issues around that. But when I think about sort of challenges around teacher diversity, I like to think about them as situated within all of the challenges that the teacher profession is facing. So there's, issues around pay. There's, other challenges. And I like to think about this as just one sort of subset of those challenges. So saying we need to increase teacher diversity does not negate all the other things that we also need to do around teachers. But I think that's a great point. And I think, in the book, so the book is actually done. So we do have some suggestions, and some of them are a little bit more radical than others, about how you might think about using pay as a lever. So yeah, no, I think I don't necessarily have the answer to that question. I think we'll all have to sort of grapple with it. But it is something that we for sure have to consider. Yeah, I think that's a great point.
Thank you.
So Amy, you had your hand up earlier, and then you took your hand back down. So I don't know. I don't know whether.
Yeah, someone else had kind of asked my question, but I have another one since. I do have another question. I'm actually curious about, because you mentioned in the context of North Carolina, when you were looking at teachers of color, ended up being mostly Black teachers. Like, I wonder, do you have any idea what you might expect to find if you looked even in more diverse places about any effects of like ethnicity? Like, is there any effect, like a student sharing the same ethnicity as their teacher, or their teacher sharing the same ethnicity as their principal, even if they are of like, different races or same races?
Yeah.
Just thinking about that.
Yeah, so, I actually don't know. So I think doing something like a simple Latinx match probably wouldn't uncover much, because there's so much, there's language diversity, there's first generation differences, things along those lines. And so I think you would have to approach it with a little bit more nuance. So I'm not sure that the mechanisms would work the same way, but I think it's worth investigating. I think, I try to push back on myself because I will slide between teachers of color and Black teachers, but most of the research is pulling on these states that have these larger Black populations like Florida and Tennessee and North Carolina. So that really is what folks are talking about. And so I don't know that we can make the assumptions that these things will apply for other groups. Although my hunch is that they will, but I don't know that we can assume that. But yeah, that's a really good question. And I should say too that it's probably not going to be done anytime soon, but I am, along with my former colleagues, or well, sort of still my colleagues at Urban, we are working on a project on Latinx student match in Texas. But there's no results for anything yet, because at one point you actually had to go to Texas, and nobody can go to Texas right now. So, but we have permission. So yeah, that'll be exciting.
Ginny, our NC State grad.
A lot of North Carolina people.
I share your disdain for Tar Heel athletics, at least, but I want
there we go.
Well, so do I.
I'm curious if you looked at the effects of white teachers matched with Black principals to see if the Black principal could be better across the board. I'm curious about those behaviors.
Yeah, okay, so let's think about who this is switching off of. Okay, so in the race match, it would just be sort of your own race match. I did not look at, I guess I didn't directly look at white teachers match with Black principals. Yeah, that's a good question. So I can tell you sort of anecdotally from so at the teacher-student level, nothing that, we never show a negative effect for white students of Black teachers. Or I guess there's zero relationship, so it doesn't hurt. But no, but that I could check that out for sure. What are you sort of interested in finding out?
Two things really, I guess, prompted the question. One is I'm interested in how like white teachers respond to having a Black principal in terms of like their own ideas about race. And second, I was curious about, if one hypothesis is that the Black principals are better than the white principals, and wondering if we also see lower white teacher turnover in the schools with the Black principals.
Yeah, so I could do that. Yeah, that's a good, yes, that's a good question. No, that's not what I originally didn't set out to think about it that way, but that's a good question, yeah.
Eric.
Hi, Constance. This has been a really interesting discussion, and I wanted to bring together some of the comments of like Tom's comments that were, talking about the sort of intersection between your previous paper and this, and some of the comments about mechanisms. So I guess the core of my question is the observation that like some turnover is good and some turnover is not good.
Yeah.
Right? And you were encouraging us to think more broadly than sort of like test score value added about, I think rightly so, about what teachers contribute to their schools. I'm wondering if you could make any progress in these data on this paper about differentiating between, turnover that has additive
Mhm,
effects on kids and turnover that doesn't.
mhm, mhm.
You know, in the absence of like command and control reassignment of teachers across schools, like the way in which we're going to get more students of color in classrooms of teacher of color is partly by like, you know, the sort of normal influence of turnover. And it may be that some of these principals are more thoughtful about that dimension of what teachers contribute to schools than they are about other dimensions. And so they're consciously like allowing certain teachers to go more freely or trying to retain other teachers. Anyway, I've talked too much, but I wonder if you could sort of differentiate between good and bad turnover in this paper.
Right, right, yeah. Yeah, so one of the other things that's just like right there laying around is I do just have like counts, right? So I can find people that just churn a lot too. But then also I can think about the sort of the traditional teacher quality piece. I think that's a really good point. Yeah.
But also, like Eric, like your question made me think. So Constance, you're estimating, well, other papers estimate the average effect of a Black teacher on same race students' achievement.
Mm-hmm.
But presumably not every Black teacher is as effective in influencing other, you know, inspiring African-American kids. Like, so like if if you could estimate like a teacher level impact on same race kids, and then ask, okay, are they the ones who are turning over, like so, or not? Like, who is the, you know, it's sort of like the like the people have tried to answer this question with like value added data, but I've not seen anybody try to do it in the context of this race matching. Like, are there just some teachers who are better role models than others? And you know, are there like super effective role model teachers?
Yes, I have not thought about it like that. But no, I think that's a good point. And I think there's other measures I can pull in about teachers that I think would be interesting. So yeah, that's a really good point.
Okay, so so we're past 5:30, and unless, so Ginny, your hand is still up. Is it just a lingering one? Do you have a new question, or was that the old one?
It was lingering. My apologies.
Okay. So, you know, why don't we just thank Constance for coming and presenting for us. Let's just have I don't know, the virtual equivalent of hand clapping.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to announce that the next PIER seminar is going to be in 2 weeks, on November 17th. Daphne Bassick from University of Virginia will be presenting a paper on teacher turnover in early childhood education. So we're having a teacher turn. I guess November is teacher turnover.
Yeah.
So in any case, thanks everybody. Thanks Constance for the PIER students who are part of the director's cut. I think Ashley, you're going to assign folks to a breakout room.
Yes, everyone who's participating in the private session for the PIER fellows should just sit tight, and I will transition you to the breakout room in just a moment.
Great. All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us on what is for sure a history-making day. We'll see you all, I hope, November 7th.